We know that growing the healthiest pigs from the start determines success to the finish. After 65 years in the animal health industry, we understand your business. We have been and remain dedicated to animal health leadership, innovation, and research. For every pig, for every barn, for every customer, we continue to invest in innovation, solutions, and insights to help you achieve the full value from every decision. Get full value from start to finish with Elanco.
Well, that's our third speaker on our breakouts or our sessions are going to be Dr. Robert Hegevort, and talking about personnel management and engagement. And we are going to Zoom him in. So we're going to have a link up here. Yep, there we go, a slide. So I'm trying. Dr. Hegevort's a native of the Netherlands and is an associate professor and extension dairy specialist in the Extension Animal Sciences and Natural Resources Department at New Mexico State University. Albert earned his bachelor's degree in tropical animal production from the College for Tropical Agriculture in Deventer in the Netherlands. He received his master's in range nutrition and a PhD in animal nutrition, both from Texas A&M. And prior to joining New Mexico State as an extension dairy specialist in November of 2005, Dr. Hegevort served for over 10 years as an independent dairy management consultant, primarily in California's Southern and Central Valley. As an extension specialist, he has been working closely with the dairy industry in New Mexico and across the Western U.S. regarding many regulatory and environmental issues, and initiated an effort to rebuild a dairy program at New Mexico State through the formation of the U.S. Dairy Education and Training Consortium. And we all know what's occurred with the dairy industry in the West and its growth over the past 20 years, and and then it's back off as well. And so many things can be gleaned and learned from human resources and our capital in human capital that exists there. And so there's a lot of things I think we can always glean from looking at another industry, in this case, another commodity, to what they've done. So I'm looking forward to the discussion here. And the key component of part of his research currently in extension programming is the development and implementation of a comprehensive dairy workforce training and safety program. So without ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hegevort and let you work through your slides on your own.
Very good. Thank you very much for that introduction. I wish I could be there in person. I would have loved to be. But when I committed to give this talk, we weren't sure yet if we were going to be allowed to do our dairy summer training program, the Dairy Consortium, as we call it, where we get students from all over the country, including this year, a couple from Iowa, to talk about the dairy industry and the dairy industry in the West, and where the dairy industry is going. It's normally a 6-week program that we this year were allowed to do 4 weeks, and it's little adjustments here still because of COVID, and but at least we were able to, we got the green light to do a program. So we're just happy to be doing programming again, and being able to do what we do best. And so what I would like to share with you all today is a little bit about things that we have learned in the dairy industry, the growing dairy industry, as it relates to the dairy workforce development and training, and lessons that we have learned, and which I would assume are some of the lessons that the pork industry might have learned as well, or is going through. And maybe there's lessons that we haven't learned yet that you all have gone through that I would love to hear from you all about, that you may have learned that we're not there yet. And so this is maybe a little bit of a talk about comparing notes. And my background, we've already talked about it, but the most of my time that I currently do is especially now coming out of COVID, is workforce training and safety. A lot of health programs that we're providing for dairy workers to be healthy at home as well as at work. And so that health aspect has really taken off due to COVID, of course. And I'm not the only one working on this. I'm a ruminant nutritionist by trade, and so I understand what happens on the front end of the cow and the rear end of the cow, and we try to figure out what happened in the middle. And I am not a human or an HR person or trained in the human sciences by any stretch of the imagination. And so this is where my partner in all of this comes in, Dr. David Dufresne at UT School of Public Health. physical therapist, has a degree in business administration and a doctorate in occupational health and safety. And so we've been working for the last 10, almost 15 years, I guess now, on a lot of programs where he looks at the human component of the equation and I look at the cow component of the equation. And we're just trying to get the best out of both. And there's a lot of things that we have learned over the years that may be helpful to other industries. They definitely have been helpful for our producers, learning where we are on this trajectory of an industry that is changing very rapidly. The dairy industry is consolidating tremendously. Of course, the pork industry has gone through tremendous consolidation, and so maybe we're on same trajectories. I'm not sure, but we are in this change, and we're realizing every day how fast this change is going. And when we're talking about the dairy industry in the West, the Southwest here where I'm at in New Mexico, your average dairy is just not your daddy's dairy anymore. I mean, instead of milking a couple of hundred or 1,000 cows, we're milking now 3 or 6 or 10 or 20,000 cows. And these numbers just keep doubling like there was no tomorrow. And so this consolidation continues. And in another 10 years, I think that our dairy industry is going to look totally different even from what it looks today. So we see increasing herd sizes everywhere. And this is not just in the US. I mean, New Zealand is here on top of this graph, and this is from work from 2015 in the Journal of Dairy Science. But you can see New Zealand, Australia, United States, Denmark, and down the line, all everywhere we are looking at increasing herd sizes, and that is straight due to economics. People have to milk more cows in order to be able to beat the cost that they're facing. So there's a couple of realities that go with that. One, of course, dairies then are larger in the number of cows. They employ, therefore, more people. Right now, we are probably looking, or the number was, based on some research that we did, about 100 per 100 cows. And the reality of that is that those employees are not just family labor anymore. They are now hired labor. And they're usually from a different or cultural or linguistic backgrounds. They are what we call foreign-born labor, primarily. That employment is often not based on skills. It is not that most of our folks show up to a dairy and say, here's my resume. It is based on the willingness to perform a task, and willingness to milk cows, or the ability to feed cows, or it is based on their willingness to work on a dairy. And with that, we have very limited or maybe unknown evaluation of their education or their training pertaining to that position. We just hire, as we can call it, we're hiring warm bodies, and then we need to see how those bodies work out in the positions that we put them. And what ends up being is that they may not be familiar working with and around large herding animals or large equipment for that matter. And so there is usually a very steep learning curve as to what it is that they need to do. So identifying where we are, we have an industry that definitely is in transition. And we have lots of metrics when it comes to our cows, but we have virtually no metrics pertaining to our workforce. How do we evaluate performance? What metrics do we use? And how do we look at our workforce and trying to pick out who are the good workers, who are the not so good workers, not necessarily from I'm going to retain that person, but from being able to train them and continue to educate them and get the best out of our employees. And so talking about these metrics, and I know a little bit about the pork industry, but I know you have also tons of metrics on your animals, as do we on the cows. Nutrition related, reproduction related, parlor related in terms of milk production in the parlor, time in the parlor, those kind of things, health related, calf related, the economics. We have gazillion data, and right now, I mean, we're even in a phase where we're trying to figure out a way how to mine all those data and get good information back to the producers and the managers to make the right decisions. That's how many data we have. But when it comes to performance on our employees, there's a lot to be learned yet. We have a couple of them that really kind of tell us, because of some nutrition software that we have, we can learn how accurate a feeder is in putting a ration together, percentage error or percentage deviation in putting the ration together and getting it to the pens. In reproduction, we have one, services per conception, but there's also an animal component in that, and that is about it. We really don't have a whole lot of metrics when it comes to maternity or to in the parlor for the milkers or for economics, rate of return per employee, for example, or those kind of things. We really have very few metrics on when it comes to our employees. And we got the cow part down, but there's a lot to be said for that human part. And that's the area where Dr. Dufresne and I spend a lot of time trying to come up with the appropriate metrics to evaluate human performance on dairies. And so that has implications. That means for the owners and the managers that, for one, owners and managers are no longer they're no longer cow managers, they are people managers. And we're still in transition, and a lot of our owners and managers were raised to be cow managers and still think in terms of what do I need to do for my cows, instead of thinking about what it is they need to do for their people. And so that's a transition phase right there. A lot of our managers and owners went to school to learn about dairy and farm management, the tech skills, but very few ag programs or very few schools or colleges for that matter teach the soft skills, how to manage people. And that is what they do on a daily basis. And if I were to ask any manager anywhere right now, what is your number one issue? What is it that you're really, really dealing with? They'll tell me it's managing people. That is their challenge. Those are their problems. That is what they try to work with all day long, and that is what frustrates them most. The cow part is the easy part. The people part and this is nothing new. I mean, other companies and other businesses have the same problems. The other thing that kind of plays into that a little bit is if you really look at what personality types there are in agriculture, working on farms, and I really don't care if that's a dairy farm or a pork farm, still a large percentage of the people that are in agriculture are not your typical extroverts, more so the people that maybe want to be on a tractor out in nature, managing their cows or managing their hogs. And the last thing they want to do is dealing with people issues. And so if they were to do a personality test, we're going to find that our owners, managers may not be the right personality types really for the position that they are now in, that they find themselves in. And so there's a learning curve there too. So, and if we look down the road, this is not going to get any easier. We expect more employees per cow, or fewer employees per cow, maybe going to one employee for 200 cows. And as we go through more and more automation and robotics, we'll probably be thinking about one employee per 250 or 300 cows. And so we're going to deal with fewer employees, but we do need those employees to be much higher skilled. They have to have much higher tech skills. And we really much higher specialization at every level, every position that is out there. And we need to define those. And very little of that has been done. And then the question becomes, who will be teaching and training these folks? Do we have the schools or the technical schools or the technical programs, certification programs or otherwise within the industry? And the answer within the dairy industry is definitely not, to train these folks on those skill sets. And we have a lot of manual versus automation. We have to understand that manual labor does not equate low skill labor. That is something that we're still kind of struggling with the industry, that a lot of times we think about manual labor as it was something that is a low skill skill set. As I said, who is training these highly specialized people? We talk about the maternity area, the calf area. Some of these calf folks need to be almost veterinarians in their skill set to be able to diagnose these calves and then properly and treat them, have to have the welfare skills and the handling skills to be able to do that appropriately. Here are some other pictures of folks that are working with calves, very highly specialized positions to be able to do all these specific jobs correctly. And so right now, a lot of that training, of course, happens on farm. And but I could see where we would have in the industry some certification programs where at least when somebody came to the farm with a certain level of certification that we could say, okay, I know that you can do these things. Now I just need you to do these for my farm and following our protocols. So the question really becomes is how does the level of knowledge about large herding animals affect the person's animal handling skills? And as an outcome, their safety, because those things are of course directly related, and the well-being of the animals. And that, of course, is a question that our consumers are asking is we want your workers to be safe at the job dealing with these 1,500-pound animals, but we also want them to know how to do their job well so that the animals are well taken care of. And so the question really becomes is to what extent can we improve human well-being? When I say well-being, I mean well-being on the job, their understanding of the job that they perform, the task that they perform, the training that they have received, the level of competency dealing with that task that they're doing, and how does that reflect animal well-being, right? And quite frankly, we really don't know. I put a line here in this graph, but I don't know if that is correct or not. We really don't know. But we know there is a relationship. Definitely there's a relationship, and we better figure out how that relationship is and be able to do something about that. So a lot of questions. Now I want to get to a few answers and some lessons that we have learned now that I have described within the industry where we are. What we do know. So we've done a lot of dairy safety awareness training, and from this training, we've learned some things that we probably didn't know. Some of it we knew, but we also picked up on some trends that are out there that we really didn't know about. So when it comes to, so this is about 1,500, almost 1,500 employees that we trained on dairy safety awareness. And we asked them a lot of questions. We said, okay, what is it that, what jobs do you do? So a lot of milkers, there's feeders, there's general workers. And in blue there, you can see we asked them, what is your highest level of education achieved? We did not ask them what did you finish? We asked them, what did you do? What did you achieve? What level of education? And so about 6.1% said no education. About almost 30% said elementary school, of course, in their country at that level, and about 25% said middle school. What that means is that about somewhere between 50 and 60% of our workers are at a middle school or below level of training or level of education. And of course, that's important. If we want to develop training programs, they need to be targeted for the comprehension level of our audience. So knowing that it's about 60% middle school or left, fifth grade or left, or less, that we need to focus on how we approach the material that we present. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When we asked about the country of origin, and let me move my cursor a little bit so I can see those numbers. So if I, in the dairy industry, had asked this question maybe 5 years ago, where were you born, country of origin, I probably would have received an answer from about 80 to 90% of them that they were from Mexico, and maybe 10% from elsewhere. But as you can see in the blue number, or the blue indicated in blue there, that we're starting to pick up a whole lot more workers from Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So we're talking about almost 1/3 of the workforce, 25%, 30%, close to 1/3. And on some of our calf ranches, actually, we're looking at about 45 to 50% of our workforce actually coming from Central America and no longer from Mexico. And so you say, well, what does that mean? Well, there's several implications that I'll talk about here in a minute. The other thing is that when we ask them about their native language, that is one of the consequences. About 64% that their native language was Spanish. And of course, we've translated a lot of training materials into Spanish. And but now we're starting to see that a large part of the workers that are coming from Central America don't speak Spanish, but actually speak a Mayan language or a Central American Mayan language from Mayan descent. And the primary language in the dairy industry in our area that we're dealing with is Quiche. There is 23 different Mayan languages that I have learned about. And in some areas, there's another language that is more predominant, but in our area and in the dairy industry, it seems to be predominantly Quiche. And I found out doing that when I was doing a training and I was speaking in Spanish to our audience, and I had somebody in the back of the room translating to another group of workers, or apparently translating. He was talking to them. So not knowing what was going on, we had a break, and I asked them. I said, "So what are you doing? Are you explaining or are you translating?" He said, "No, I'm translating." I said, "Into what?" And he said, "Into Quiche, because these folks here don't speak Spanish." And this is where I learned that a lot of Central American workers in at least in the dairy industry and maybe in agriculture in general, if they didn't go to school in the cities in Central America, they may not have learned Spanish, and they speak a Mayan language, and they speak Mayan to each other. And so when we're doing training in Spanish, we found out that we're basically missing out now, getting close to 30% or 1/3 of our workforce. And on some of these calf ranches, I'm missing out on almost half of our workforce. Now, some of them have learned to speak Spanish, and some of them, being here longer, have learned how to speak English and instead of Spanish. And so, I mean, they are adjusting. But this is something that we found out over the last 5, 6, 7 years that threw me for a loop. And so these things now have some implications as it comes to workforce development, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So one, we found out that most of our workers do no longer come from an agricultural background. That I think that's both in New Mexico, or both in Mexico as well as Central America. They no longer come from an ag background. They have therefore no experience working with large animals or large equipment like we do on our farms. And as I said, about 60% of our employees has a 5th grade level education or below. So that's important for us to know how we need to develop our programs. The other thing that we found out, that there's a high level of illiteracy or a very low reading comprehension level, which we really need to look at. Do we really want to present anything in writing if we have such a low reading comprehension level? And I will talk about that in a minute as well. The other thing that we're dealing with is a very high level of labor turnover on our dairies, especially in the first 6 to 12 months. Once they make it through that, then they typically will stay on longer. And like I said, we have a shift in the typical workforce makeup to more Central Americans, which of course are now from a different culture. We're now talking about an indigenous culture versus maybe the traditional as we know it. And I don't know if there's anything traditional about a Hispanic culture, but what we refer to in general terms as a Hispanic culture or a Latino culture. We're now dealing with a culture, people that are from a different culture, have a different cultural background, even though they live in what we refer to Latin America, right? Or Central America. So now we have an Anglo culture, we have a Hispanic culture, and we have a Mayan culture. So we just added a culture to our workforce mix. And a lot of dairymen are even not aware of that fact that is happening. The other thing that we're now what is now happening, of course, we had English, we had Spanish, and we added now another language in the mix, or maybe even more languages if we're dealing with different groups from different Central American countries with different Mayan languages, if you will. The other thing that we're running into is a different body stature for folks that are now coming from Central America. And I'll show that here in a picture in a minute. We're dealing now with three cultures, three languages, and three statures on our dairy farms, where we always thought that we only were dealing with two cultures and two languages, and maybe two statures. And case in point is this picture right here. So this is in a rotary parlor where milkers are standing at the same height, attaching machines to cows. And you can look at the milker in the forefront, and he's Hispanic. And if you look at the railing, the second railing, and you follow that along, you can see there's another worker in the background. You can tell there's a difference in height, maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches, maybe 12 inches. I don't know exactly what that difference in height is, but there's a difference in height. And so what does that mean? Well, this worker in the forefront, he's attaching machines right what we call in his wheelhouse from an ergonomic perspective. He's just hanging machines right. His arms are pretty much vertical in front, or horizontal in front of him, and he can hang those machines with ease. Not very difficult. The other thing is that he can reach out and push a button there where that chain goes up on the right hand side of the cow to either attach or detach those machines. And so he's working fairly comfortable within his wheelhouse. But then you look in the background that the milker that's a little smaller on the right hand side, that is him in focus. And as you can tell, his arms are actually reaching up, and they are not vertical. They are now in an angled position. So from an ergonomic perspective, we can ask the question, who is going to get tired quicker, fatigued quicker? The one that is working, the worker that's working within his wheelhouse, or the worker that is with his arms elevated, hanging machines? And if you do that 8 hours a day versus the other worker at 8 hours a day. And so from an ergonomic perspective, we've just added a whole other level of complication to the job. With workers getting fatigued sooner simply because of their stature. So that adds another, and so that's another area where Dr. Dufresne and I are doing research, is looking at fatigue on dairies and how that affects performance. At what point in time during a shift are people so fatigued that they start committing errors, and therefore their safety is at stake, besides performance, of course. And so that's a question that we try to answer. So we started in about 2011 or 2012 with developing some of our dairy safety awareness training. And we developed these DVDs in those years and got those out to many dairies across the world. Many people have played these DVDs in many situations. One, to kind of check the box to document that employees are trained on dairy safety issues, but also to improve job understanding of what it is to work with large animals and large equipment. We developed those in both English and Spanish, and they were very well received. It was the first product out there that really talked about dairy safety awareness. And we've done a lot of extension trainings. This is your typical extension room, and some of you may be very familiar with that. And this is a room where we had close to 100 workers in a room, and of course we do that at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and those workers have already been working since 4, 5, 6 in the morning, and you bring them in at 10 o'clock and you give them coffee and a donut and you sit them down where it's either comfortable, the room is comfortable, they come out of the heat or they come out of the cold. And so they sit down, and when you get a crowd like that and you give them a cup of coffee or something, then pretty soon this is what you end up with, right? Everybody just crashes. And that is because you only have a few minutes that you have their attention span, and they zone out. And that has nothing to do with the speaker here, a very good speaker that we have that works with us. It's simply because that is what happens when you talk to large crowds like that. So we realized that there was not necessarily a need for more dairy training tools. What there was a need for more effective training tools. How can I effectively train people without, like I just showed, putting them to sleep, right? It's all about effectiveness. Just giving people written standing operating procedures doesn't cut it anymore. To say, hey, this is how we do it, and just go out and Jose will tell you how to do it. That is not training. Reading comprehension of anything written is a problem. We know that reading comprehensions is low. So if I give somebody a written piece of a protocol, standard operating procedure, that comprehension level and that comprehension is a huge challenge. If reading comprehension is a challenge, then I know that comprehension retention or learning, long-term learning and retaining that information is going to be a challenge too. The other thing is that most of us in the workforce are adult learners, which means that we're visual learners. We want to see how it's done, not on paper, but in the real world. And so that's another thing that we're challenged with, which where videos come in handy, but where paper instruction really is really antiquated. I mean, if you think about it, paper instruction, we've done it forever. We can do better. We have more efficient and more effective ways to train people. So that is where we put these videos now on iPads. Put those iPads in front of workers, gave them a set of earbuds, and let them personally go through training. So we individualized the training. And what that allowed us to do, because they were now in their own environment with these earbuds, we could also take those folks in the right bottom picture that have issues with reading comprehension and maybe answering questions that we still have in reading format, take them through that on an individual basis. And that really helped out with the comprehension level, but also with their level of frustration. A lot of these workers have gone through, I don't know, numerous trainings on dairies, on businesses that they've worked for, but really never got anything out of it and kind of went through the motions without really being able to understand what it was that they were taught. So we've done these trainings now as a part of our research. It takes about an hour and a half to go through this safety training. Like I said, it's individual and it's interactive, which means that on these iPads, they have to actually indicate what are the answers to the questions, and they go through the training just like that. So individual, it's interactive. The interactive part means that they will stay with the training. They don't venture off in La La Land when a DVD is playing. They have to actually answer those questions in order to move it forward. And you can make it as hard. They have to answer them all right before they can move forward, or put them back to where they can start over again. You can make that as hard as you want to. So it's individual and it's interactive. Of course, we give these workers a certificate of training, and we give the owners of the dairy a training report which says that these workers by name have been trained on the following topics, and these were the grades that were obtained. And so they can put that in their files. And so if there's any OSHA issues or otherwise a need to document that training, then the producers can do that. This is actually on a dairy in Washington State where we did training. And the reason why I bring this picture up is this young man on the left came into that training room. He was one of those that had a really hard time with reading. And he came in. I wish I had a picture of him coming into that room, but that was a phase of a thundercloud. He did not want to be in that training. He did not want to do that training. He had done that before. He had been around that block, and he would have been frustrated all throughout having to read through this training. So when we were able to take him aside and kind of talk him through the training and the video, so the audio video combination versus the writing and the reading and writing, that cleared up his face. And then when we gave him a certificate of training and said, well done, you passed this training and you have a very good grade on this training, look at what happened to his face. And and that's why I bring up that picture, do not underestimate the power of recognition. Being able to recognize a job well done in training and education is an extremely powerful tool. It may be the first certificate of training that this young man ever received. We've heard stories about workers that were in New Mexico that we trained and later found in Idaho or in Washington, and they came into the training because they knew we were coming with their certificate of training framed to say, we got that hanging in our dining room. This is, or in our bedroom, this is very important to us. We framed it. And so that power of recognition is an extremely powerful tool. So we're looking for effectiveness of training. We can measure that. There's several ways to do that. For one, level one evaluation is really to learn, that you like the room, was the temperature good, that you like the pizza we brought in, were the questions easy to understand, how was the atmosphere, really that's level one evaluation. And you can see there that, there's a little variation, but in generally there's lots of agreement that they like the training. They like to use the iPads. They like the questions. And if they could read them, they were easy to understand. That's also very important. Then level two evaluation is basically a pre-test and a post-test. And as you can see there on the bottom left, that we went from, say, a D level to an A level of comprehension on about 1,400 some workers. And so that there really was an increase in comprehension. And then we go back about 6 months later and see if there has been a change in their attitude when it comes to safety. And we're picking up some really interesting things there as well that people are really starting to take and really recognizing. And that is, of course, is awareness, safety issues. And they're doing something about those. They're reporting those. And I know there's bias in these answers. And I get that because we're not monitoring them, we're asking them. And of course, they're going to say yes on a lot of these things. But we're starting to see some really interesting trends. In 2017, what we did when we developed for the farm program, the animal handling training, we did the same thing. We put those on iPads and started doing animal handling training via the iPads, via video and audio. But then we added one component too. And after this training, we'll actually take those workers out in the pens and then talk about these concepts of animal handling, the flight zone, point of balance, and those concepts that are abstract concepts that are really hard to understand if you try to explain them even on a board or even on a video, and get them out in a pen and say, okay, I want that one animal separated. And how would you do that? How would you go about, this is an animal that I need to treat. I need her in this pen. How would you go about doing this? Utilizing concepts like the flight zone and point of balance and things like that. So we can do this hands-on training. And then, of course, we ask the owners and the managers to continue this level of training. So now we go from classroom to life training. And this has made a lot of producers have wanted us to come out and do this. And there's actually associations in several Western states that have adopted this training, that have now people that are doing this for their membership and going out and actually doing live training and doing that repeatedly because of the turnover that we have. And so then you can go take it one step further and say, okay, let's do return demonstrations. And you go do this. Demonstrate to me that you understand this concept. And then, you can correct some of that. And that's what we leave with the owners and the managers to continue doing. So what are some of the findings and observations that we've had from this animal training? Well, again, large majority of our employees have no experience working with animals or large equipment. Many employees know very little about animal senses, about their sight, their hearing, their smell. Many employees have the wrong perceptions about how to act around animals. And even seasoned workers who may know the what, may not know the why. Experienced workers very much appreciate the validation of their skills, what they do know. And owners and managers can make a great impact by reinforcing how important animal handling skills are to them. So if they're part of that training and they reinforce that, that really hits it home for the workers to say, okay, it's important to the boss, we better learn this. And many owners and managers have taken these training concepts to build on and practice these concepts with their workers. And I'm going to skip through this real quick so that I can get to the end of my presentation. What does this all mean for animal welfare? Because of course, that's one of those things that we constantly get challenged with. Well, for one, I think that employees typically mean well, but if you can't anticipate what animals will do, it's easy to get very frustrated. And frustration, in our industry, at least in the dairy industry, is the perfect setup for the wrong outcome and possible animal mishandling or abuse claims or videos. I think that that's one of the reasons why we have some of those videos out there. And human well-being concerns increase with the lack of understanding of what a 1,500-pound animal can do, obviously, right? So the other thing that we have realized is cows have great memories and they recognize people well and know who treats them well or not. I can walk into a herd and really tell how animals are being treated. Learned behavior is an important component of the human animal interaction equation, and I can tell the difference between different farms. Animal handling is much more an art than it is a task. It takes two to tango between the handler and the animals. And correct animal handling starts the day an animal is born and continues for a lifetime. Animal handling skills are learned slowly by observing and practicing over and over again. And that is why the repetition with the owners and the managers comes in. And given that an animal handling is a skill set, the question needs to be asked, what human personality traits does a cow handler need to possess? What do I hire for? What do I look for in a person to bring on my farm? And I can make the claim that not everybody should be an animal handler, should be working around animals. Maybe they're better on a tractor or in a machine shop or on the office, but not around animals. And that also answers the question, did we select the right people for the job? Dairies where handlers understand why they are doing what they are doing, cows are calmer, more curious, less fearful of humans and human interactions. There's no doubt about that. So animal well-being benefits as we teach and train employees the skills and the knowledge, which we can do. And then we focus on coaching the correct attitudes towards working with large animals. Things like motivation, confidence, integrity, honesty, enthusiasm, and commitment. And so that is something where we work with middle managers to give them those skill sets to be able to focus on that with their workers. So we have developed a large library of training modules over the last couple of years, from our safety awareness to animal handling. We have completed feeds and feeding last year. Calf care is something that we're working on right now with the Idaho Dairymen Association, and with the farm program, we're working on a cold cow care training video that is where we are currently, the script is finished, and we're going to film that later this year. This is a slide with all of our resources as they are online in English, Spanish, and Quiche for producers, for managers on those different videos. Be more than willing to share that with anybody that had an interest. They are also on our website, NMSU Dairy Extension website, and they're available for download. This is a safety reference manual that we completed with the farm program that we wrote for them as part of their workforce development program. And with that, I will open it up for any questions that may be in the room.
I do think, Dr. Hagedorn, you had a chart up there that talked a lot about the relationship between the kind of caretaker well-being and animal well-being, and there's a lot of truth to that for sure across our industry. So we could probably share several things with you from our observations in that regards. So we had a speaker earlier this morning talking about, as we move from for Proposition 12 in California to give sows more space and make some conversions on farms, and the logistics and infrastructure to do that, also taking into account its impact on our caretakers, and making sure we design it so that they can still get their job done efficiently and effectively, because if you don't, then it won't get done, such as treating and moving animals to hospital pens and such like that. So well, we had a slimmer audience here toward the end of our day, so I appreciate you joining us, Dr. Hagevort, and thank you for your time and your resources there that you left us with. So thank you very, very much.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for the invite.